the Singapore economic success model or the Singapore economic miracle. I have spoken in maybe more than 40 countries, and everywhere I go, even in countries that I don't speak, they always say, you know how many presidents and prime ministers have announced that they want to be the next Singapore? Many. So what is it about the Singapore economic miracle? And can it be adapted to the Philippines? Next. In Islamic finance, there's a concept called the sharing economy. So for today's purpose, actually I'm talking about sharing between the government and the people. Okay? Next. Economic performance. Number 1 city with the best potential. Number 1, UN Human Capital Index. Top 3 in the world for foreign trade and investment. Next. Competitiveness and business environment. The world's easiest place to do business. Top 2 most competitive city in the world. Best business environment in Asia Pacific in the world. Asia's most network ready country. I can go on and on and on, but I won't, because then you won't have time left for lunch or the next speaker. But today, I believe, Singapore has the highest number of global top ranking accolades compared to any country in the world. Next. I will not be doing justice if I only tell you the fairy tale without the bad and the ugly, right? So we have some poor rankings as well. Let's look at some of these poor rankings. 149 inequality index. That means the gap between the rich and the poor is very big. 129 for press freedom. 126 most unhappy. 146 most emotionless people in the world, and the fastest walkers in the world according to these studies. Next. Second lowest fertility in the world. Second least likely to help a stranger out of 135 countries. 40 out of 41 countries for libido. Most expensive in the world. Let me talk a bit about the 40 out of 41 countries in libido. Everybody knows the meaning of libido, right? Okay. Actually, this ranking is not a bad ranking. It's a very good ranking. Because how do you measure libido? You ask people, right? How often do you have sex? Okay. How good was it? How do you rate your performance, right? So Singaporeans are very honest people. They tell the truth. And that's why the ranking is so low. So why is this a good ranking? If you want to go to a country to do business, you want to go to a country where people are very honest, right? As Professor Digno mentioned, right? You said honesty, right? You all know, right? You need to have it. And that's why it's a good ranking. Because from this you can tell, if you come to Singapore to do business, chances are you meet more honest people relative to other countries. Next. A key contribution to the economic success of Singapore is something that very few people know. And that is, we have a very unique fiscal policy. From a cash flow perspective, we may not be spending any money on healthcare, pensions, or public housing. In other words, the inflows exceeds the outflows every year. And partly because of this, we have tons of money that we can use for economic development and social development. See, most countries run deficits. They are short of cash. Or Singapore, right? We have too much of it. And this is a very unique fiscal policy that has contributed to Singapore's success. Look at these numbers. Wow. In terms of budget surpluses, we regularly have the highest budget surplus per capita in the world. Look at the amount of budget surpluses. Now you see budget surpluses and IMF fiscal reporting guidelines budget surpluses. But this is I think only Professor Glorio who understand this accounting concept. IMF fiscal accounting, which is on cash flows, and the government's budget accounting, which does not take into account some of the inflows and outflows. But you can see the big number. And it's estimated that our reserve today is about $1.9 trillion. So what is this sharing economy, sharing between the government and people that has led arguably to Singapore's success? Well, it depends on the extent and the equitability of the sharing. And I'll give you some examples. I'm going to talk a bit about public pensions, which in Singapore we call the Central Provident Fund. I'm going to talk a bit about public housing. Next. Our public pension fund, the government keeps part of the returns, and that is estimated to be about 12 billion a year. So now you know why, right? Singapore, in a way, is so successful. Now imagine, you look at countries like in the Europe, they're all running deficits, right? If the politicians can convince the people to let the government keep, say, 0.5% of the return on all their pension funds, I think all the deficits will go away. Right? So this concept of sharing, of course, sharing depends a great deal on trust. You know, like many of you said, in how many countries do the people trust the government a great deal? Not many today, right? Okay. Next. So I don't know, in the Philippines, will this work? I don't know, right? As Ronald Hickey knows it, you know, as your RD, I'm not here to tell you how to do it, what to do. You will figure it out yourself. Of course, we can try and work it out together. Next. Before I go on, I want to switch a bit and talk about sending a message to all the researchers today. First, I want to congratulate all the researchers for receiving your certificates and your awards for the research you have done. What has your research got to do with my topic on public housing? I was teaching part-time for about more than 2 decades. And if you are doing research in Singapore, it's likely your professor will ask you these questions. What is your original contribution to the field? What is your original contribution to your community or to society at large? How significant is your research to the field? How significant it is to your community and society? And the most important question, now that you have finished your research thesis or your project, what are you going to do in the future? Are you going to campaign for your research so that it will lead to better policies? What are you going to do to lead to change for the better plans for the future, for your community, for your city, for your province, for your company, for your university, whatever. So, what has that got to do with my topic on how most countries can solve their public housing problems? You see, about 30 years ago, there was one topic that I knew nothing about, and it was public housing. But then it was very strange because at that time, hardly anybody was doing any research on public housing. And so I said, well, if nobody is doing research, I think public housing is going to be a big problem. By the way, I went back to school in Turin, Italy in September for 2 weeks at the School of Regulation. to go back to school at 69 years old to learn about regulation of public goods and services, like public housing. And so today, right, I've written a few thousand articles on public housing. I have made hundreds of speeches on public housing. I speak on public housing very often. Why? Because it is increasingly becoming a very big problem for many cities, provinces, and countries. So when I say, oh, I can speak free, I will fly there and pay my own household, right? How you may be able to solve your public housing problem. Also, I'm very popular. And now the secret, how to solve your public housing problem. The problem with public housing in practically every country or city is that every house they build, they lose money, right? And so they have a problem. So the solution, if you follow the Singapore public housing model, by the way, Singapore has won a UN Habitat Award for public housing. 80% of the population in Singapore lives in public housing. And 80% of those who live in public housing actually own their public house. So, the secret is so simple conceptually. If the problem is every house you build you lose money, you cannot build a lot of houses, you make a 1% profit on every house that you build. And then you use the 1% profit to help those who are very, very poor to buy the public housing at an even cheaper price with bigger subsidies depending on how poor they are. Simple, right? So it's a win-win solution. The government gets to build as many public housing as they want, so they get voted in all the time. That's why we have a one-party parliament for 50 odd years. 90% of the parliamentarians are from the same party. And one reason is because of our public housing policy. It's a win-win for the people because, hey, where can you find a country where 80% of the people live in public housing and 80% own their public house? And a lot of people make money from public housing, because after 5 years you have lived in it, you can sell it away at the open market. Okay, this is the last slide, and I just want to end by saying that after 69 years, going to be 70 years, hundreds of speeches, thousands of articles, 5 books, right? To be honest, it has been a great disappointment because most of the ideas that I share around the world, very few have come to fruition. But I'm happy to say there are some shining examples. Let me give you some of them. In Africa, Rwanda, if you look at what's happening today, is one of the best in terms of economic and social development. Why? Because they copied the Singapore model in a big way. In Central Asia, is Kazakhstan. Okay? They send their civil servants to Singapore for training. So why does it work for some countries and why it doesn't work for so many countries? To me, there's no simple answer, but I can't leave you with no answer, right? I guess it's political will. How many politicians were there to do something that has never been done before in their own country? Let me end by making a wish. I hope I can continue to help people, countries, cities to solve their public housing problems. And the biggest obstacle is, I think even in countries like Hong Kong or perhaps in the Philippines, the biggest obstacle to the public housing solution is the private property developers and the tycoons. Because they all think if you follow the Singapore model, it will affect the development and the profits of the private property sector. That is not the case. Look at the Singapore experience and history. both the private and public housing property sectors went through the roof. And with that, I thank you.
You are the best teacher, you know?
Thank you very much, Honorable Dr. Fellow Leong Hian, for that very informative presentation.
Okay.